It's nearly 3 weeks since the horrific Hamas attacks on Israeli civilians. And as Israel prepares for a ground war in Gaza, there are increasing calls for a ceasefire or a humanitarian pause. There's division in Parliament. What will our audience here have to say about it? Tonight we are in Bradford, there in nearly a century. He's previously been Deputy Chairman of the party. From Labour, Jonathan Reynolds is a Shadow Secretary for Business and Trade, elected to the Commons in 2010. He also chairs the parliamentary group Christians on the Left. Alyn Smith is one of 43 Scottish National Party MPs at Westminster. Having spent much of this century as an MEP, he was elected to the Commons in 2019. He speaks for his party on European affairs. Baroness Sayeeda Warsi is the first Muslim woman to ever serve in cabinet and was also co-chair of the Conservative Party. After 4 years as a minister, she resigned from David Cameron's government over his support for Israel during a previous Israeli-Gaza conflict in 2014. And the award-winning journalist Gabriel Pogrund is Whitehall editor at the Sunday Times. In 2020, he co-wrote a book called Left Out, the inside story of Labour under Corbyn. Welcome to our panellists, welcome to our audience here in Bradford. Great to see you. Welcome to you at home, of course. You can listen to the programme on BBC Sounds after the programme, and also there's always a lively discussion on social media as well. And I want to say tonight, and I've said it before, I'm going to say it again tonight, passions are running high, and I want to make sure that we have a respectful conversation where everyone's views are heard and we're not shouting over each other. So let's go for that this evening. And let's take our first question from Brendan Fletcher.
Is it possible for Israel to defend itself and root out Hamas while avoiding regional conflict and humanitarian catastrophe?
Is it possible? Lee?
The situation in the Middle East is extremely challenging, but it starts from a place on October the 7th where 1,400 people were brutally executed by a terrorist organisation. And we have to start there, and I'm afraid for me, we have to stop there. There's no nuance to that, there's no context, there's no explanation. There is the reality that 1,400 people are no longer with us in this world due to terrorism. And what we've all got to try and do is we've got to try and get through this very difficult period where Israel does absolutely have the right to defend itself.
But Brendan's question in terms of avoiding regional conflict and humanitarian catastrophe, how can that circle be squared, if at all?
Well, Israel has to have the ability to be able to defend itself and to prevent this happening again. And the UK said that we're very clear that we will stand in support of Israel doing that. And what we also have to do at the same time is ensure that the humanitarian challenges, which we're all seeing and we all dislike very much and we all want to stop. That's one of the reasons why the Rafah crossing is starting to be opened, why dozens and dozens of goods have been able to get through there, and why the Prime Minister has talked about humanitarian pauses. But you have to go back.
And what does that mean? Can I just ask you, what does he mean by humanitarian?
To try and ensure that there is enough support within Gaza and wherever else it is needed to support civilians. Because
and for how long are you?
That ultimately will be down to people being willing to do that on the ground and whatever is necessary on the ground. And I hope that that is possible. But ultimately, we have to accept that this is a state of war, and it was caused by what happened on October the 7th.
Sayeeda.
I would urge everybody to go out and inform themselves about the Israel-Palestine conflict. It didn't start on the 7th of October. It started. My heart goes out to those families who lost their loved ones and those that continue to wait for their loved ones to be returned because they're being held as hostages. But the only way that we ensure Israel's long-term security is by ensuring that Israel ends the occupation. And the way we end the occupation is by ensuring that we have a political deal on the table and that we end up taking both Israel and Palestine to where it was always intended, a two-state solution.
Jonathan.
To answer Brandon's question, I think the answer has to be yes. Any conflict has to be conducted in accordance with international law. That should always be what we believe and reinforce should happen. I think the scale of the human tragedy here, the suffering on both sides, means we all want to see that come to an end. I don't think you can I think many of us probably have struggled to sleep this week with the things we've seen, the things we've heard, the scale of that. And you've always got to bring it back to human suffering, and every civilian life is of equal value. There's been a lot of talk about a ceasefire this week. I think if that was something which meant that Israel could not try and get those hostages back, or left the same threat in place, I don't think that would be allowing Israel to defend itself, and I don't think that would be possible. I do think it's clear right now on the humanitarian question, Brandon, to answer your specific point, that not enough aid is getting into Gaza to meet the needs that are there, and that's why I think the move for a humanitarian pause has been put forward at the UN. That would be the right thing to do to get that aid.
So that's
into
a brief
Gaza.
cessation of hostilities before they resume again?
Well, I think that has to be, given the scale of the challenges in Gaza and, again, the human suffering there, that has to be something that is promoted. Now, it's a shame that the UN, it didn't go through, but that, yes, I think that is essential at this stage. But I also agree with Sayeeda. I think the only way we can not just end this stage of what has been a long-running conflict is to get a political process back up and running, no matter how hard that is. It's certainly not going to be easy, but a two-state solution, that is security for Israel and prosperity and dignity and security for Palestinians as well. That has got to be what we fight for, and it cannot be, no matter how hard we pull away from it.
OK. We had a lot of questions on this, and there's a lot of hands up, so I'm going to come around to quite a few of you now. Yes, the woman there.
I just think the really passive language being used by the government is quite disgusting. This isn't a humanitarian crisis. This isn't something passive. This is a brutal bombardment of a civilian population that is half children. And I think it's time that someone start to find a backbone and start saying that this isn't OK. Everybody's condemning the attacks that Hamas conducted. No one in their right mind would say that that was OK. But when do we start condemning the murder of children from the sky? When do we start condemning bombing mosques and churches and apartment buildings? When do we start condemning that?
Who do you make a ceasefire with? This is a terrorist organisation which has executed babies, which has uploaded murders to Facebook. Hamas is an organisation that needs to be taken out of the Palestinian area. There is absolutely zero ability to negotiate with these. They're putting.
How many Palestinian wives?
Let him speak, and then I'll let you speak.
They are putting rockets next to civilian populations. They are using the Palestinian people as humanitarian shields. There is absolutely no way we can negotiate with them. If you want to free Palestine, if you want a peaceful Middle East, Hamas need to be removed.
Killed. It's not Hamas we're seeing blown to bits on social media, is it? We're seeing children, women, old people, even, I mean, the men as well, poor fathers with their children in bags.
Exactly, Jewish people.
Hamas are embedding themselves.
Bassem Youssef asked, what's the exchange rate for an Israeli life to a Palestinian life? What does the death toll have to get to before this ledger becomes equal? What is it? Because it's thousands.
Let me come round some more of the audience, please. The man back there with the white shirt, further back in the glasses, yeah.
I absolutely agree that it's horrific that there are so many casualties on both sides. I have to say that I completely disagree. It did start on October the 7th. Whatever happened before is completely separate. This is a war that was started deliberately by Hamas on October the 7th. And I'd just like to ask one question. I'd like to ask one question. What do we really think Hamas expected? They knew exactly what they were doing, and they have made the Palestinians the victims just as much as the Israelis. And the last thing I'd like to say is, Palestinians aren't the Israelis' enemies. There's this fixation that there'll never be peace. There will be peace, but you give me, as an Israeli, as a Brit, you give me somebody who I can talk to, who's not going to tell me, on the flip side, actually, I want to exterminate you, and I want to kill all your family.
Let's hear from the man in the glasses there. Yes.
I think there is a peaceful side to 2 points. You've got the West Bank, where you've got Mahmoud Abbas, who's prepared to talk dialogue, but it's not going nowhere. And then you've got those that are in Gaza, open-air prison. We hear a lot of rhetoric from the United Nations, and the United Nations is, as far as I'm concerned, puppets. You know,
puppets of who?
Puppets of the 1%. The 1%, the elite, whoever they may be. However, the United Nations, I mean, the General Secretary made a statement and the backlash he faced. And so, you know, it's difficult to be in a position and be opinionated, especially in the United Nations, who are meant to be seen to be quite equal to everybody. The other point is the conflict did start a long time ago, and I think the perpetrators should be held to account. Britain and France have the biggest accountability to account for in terms of the beginning of this conflict. They were the ones that signed over the agreement to say that Jews were allowed to have a piece of Palestine. Historically, we need to look at it with a clear narrative rather than looking at it from the 7th of October.
Okay. Gabriel.
I mean, look, I would challenge your suggestion that the UN is in any way representative of Israel's interests. I mean, let it not be forgotten, a minister of the Israeli state today called on his general secretary to resign in light of what Israel claimed were comments contextualising what happened. You talked about Jews being given a piece of land. I mean, there are clearly people in the audience tonight who object to the circumstances in which Israel came to exist in 1948. We have to deal with the reality as it exists right now, and that reality is that Israel does exist, and its principal goal as a state is to safeguard the interests and safety of the Jewish people and all of the inhabitants within its borders. So let's just recognise that reality and consider where do we actually go from here. There are two possible solutions. There's a potential military solution, and there is a diplomatic one. And anybody who talks about a ceasefire has to state in detail what the diplomatic solution looks like. There's been the inevitable condemnation of Israel's response, and candidly, I'll try to be intellectually humble. I have no idea if in the context of asymmetric warfare there is any way of avoiding civilian casualties, although the numbers are horrific and disgusting and heartbreaking. So if you want to avoid more of that, you have to have specific, detailed ideas. And I will say I find it extraordinary, and it's easy to forget, Turkey is a member of NATO. Qatar owns half the real estate in London. They have for 2 decades hosted large proportions of Hamas's leadership. We have to use not only the West, but our allies in the Middle East and their diplomatic resource to ensure Hamas the only way this ends is if Israel can look its population in the eye and say, after this status quo shattering event, the biggest murder of Jews since the Holocaust, they have to, Bibi Netanyahu, whatever one happens to think of the man, and I do not think either side are well served by their leaders, he has to be able to look his public in the eye and say, I've extracted security guarantees. The only way that happens is if Hamas's leadership either leaves or there are massive diplomatically negotiated changes to the reality on the ground, which has been there since 2005.
Okay. Sayeeda, you want to come back in?
I agree with a lot of what Gabriel has said, because I think at the moment what we don't have in Israel and Palestine between Hamas and Netanyahu is that either party is a partner for peace. I want to read something to you. This quote, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support the bolstering of Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy, to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. That was Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2019, supporting Hamas, because he knows that as long as Hamas remains there, he can always argue that there is no partner for peace. During our lifetime, there have been 2 moments when peace could have happened. One was in the early 90s with the Oslo Accords, which were negotiated by Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, and both of them were awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for that. Tragically, 2 years after those accords, a right-wing Israeli settler assassinated Yitzhak Rabin, and after the end of that, the peace process came to an end. The second moment came not so long ago in 2016 when John Kerry, as Secretary of State, put forward a peace proposal. That proposal was accepted by the Palestinian Authority and it was rejected by a one Netanyahu. So I think it's really important. I do believe, Gabriel, that there is an opportunity for peace. It's the only way that Israel will secure its long-term future. And I genuinely believe that what we should be saying to our politicians is that you've got to stop using language which actually in the real world makes no sense. It sounds like
Are you including your Conservative?
I'm including the Conservatives and actually the leader
here?
of the opposition. In the real world, it sounds insensitive. It sounds like it's one-sided. It sounds hypocritical, and it sounds like you do not understand the depth of this issue, and it goes no way towards actually resolving the issue. All you do is embolden Netanyahu, a man who is mired in allegations of corruption, who actually in his cabinet has a minister who has been convicted of terrorism, another minister who is a self-confessed fascist, and who are governing on the basis of a coalition agreement which denies the very right of the Palestinian state to exist. Alyn.
Well, firstly, I'd say I very strongly agree with Sayeeda in everything she's said tonight. I think anyone who thinks that history started a week past Saturday is part of the problem with this discussion. We must look at this in the right. I deplore anti-Semitism, I deplore Islamophobia, I deplore any death of any innocent civilian anywhere. And the SNP, you'll be aware we take this quite personally because our First Minister, our leader, Hamza Yousaf, has got close relatives, close loved ones in Gaza right now. I grew up in the Middle East. We've got all sorts of connections to the wider region. And in the Middle East, everything is connected to everything else. And I really agree with Gabriel's point that the leadership of the Palestinian sides and the Israeli sides are not well served by their leaders right now. And it's not just two sides.
But in terms of Brandon's question, is it possible for Israel to defend itself and also root out Hamas while avoiding conflict and humanitarian catastrophe? What's the answer to that question?
Well, first off, there has to be a ceasefire in order to allow humanitarian aid in and talks to happen.
And do you think Hamas would go along with that ceasefire?
I think Hamas is now in a position where they're going to have to go along with that. There's already rumours just in the past 24 hours that Hamas themselves are proposing their evacuation to Lebanon or perhaps another third country.
You think they should?
I think they should get out of the equation, absolutely, and that's where there would be agreement on this panel. Hamas is part of the problem. I carry no torch for anybody in this discussion. Look, I'm a gay man. I would far rather live in Tel Aviv than Ramallah. Hamas throws people like me off high buildings. I carry no torch for anybody in this. And none of us should be partisan within this. So war has rules. International humanitarian law has to be the basis of any negotiated settlement. Every single conflict in human history has ended with a piece of paper and a treaty. There has to be negotiation, however tough, however hard. There has to be peace, and the way that you can actually get to a peace is by talks. So there has to be a ceasefire, there has to be a talks-based settlement based on international law, and we need to see that actually taking forward right now because too many people are hurting on all sides.
Man here in the black shirt.
Israel is killing babies and the elderly on a daily basis. Thousands are dying. They're not committing to the international laws. Why is the world standing by while Israel continues to break every law there is and continue with the murders?
And what do you think Israel should do about Hamas?
Israel should have dialogue with Hamas. They should have a ceasefire straight away.
Sorry.
It works. It works. We did have talks with the IRA. It works. And that's going to be the solution.
All right. There's a woman there in the middle. I think you've got a grey sweater on with dark hair. Yeah.
First of all, we'd never, ever in Israel sit down to people who don't recognise our existence. And I totally agree. There is no way that Israel will ever back down to terrorism or negotiate with terrorism. And I wanted to share something personally. That music festival, a very close friend was there. He's 26 years old. He was 26 years old. He went to a music festival. I've got children. Lots of people have probably got children who could go to Glastonbury, have a nice time. This guy went, have a lovely time. He went the year before and loved it. He went this year and was shot dead. His parents are absolutely crushed. They're heartbroken. And this is not negotiable. Israel has a responsibility to its people and everybody who's there to protect them. They didn't start it. They are going in with a heavy heart because they do not want this.
OK, thank you. The man behind you, and the man further back with the green shirt on there. Green short-sleeve shirt, yes.
First of all, I want to condemn Hamas's attack on Israelis. I think the lady's point here about the person that was killed in the music festival is abhorrent. But I also want to make this point clear. Hamas broke international laws. But does two wrongs make a right? Does that still give Israel the right to break international law? And what I have to Mr. Rowley, you know, I completely disagree with this kind of rhetoric the Conservative government's coming out with, because, you know, you're almost justifying, just because Hamas did something wrong, you're giving the green light for Israel to commit wrong. And to Mr. Reynolds as well, the Labour Party's position on this has been absolutely appalling. Keir Starmer on LBC clearly said that they have the right to stop water, electricity and aid, and then all of a sudden he backtracks a week later. Mr. Flip-Flop, as always, he changes his mind, and the Labour Party here in Bradford is collapsing. People are resigning on tap, and there was a report today to say there was going to be 1.5 million votes being lost. And that's really because Labour don't stand for anything anymore. So, my big point...
So let's give you both a chance. I'm sorry, OK, go on, sorry.
And I also want to speak for the Palestinian children. Just as the lady said about the Israeli citizen, I want to talk about a young girl called Habiba. Habiba was 8 years old. She loved babies, and she wanted to be a doctor. And she wanted to learn English so she could tell about the Gaza situation and what's happening in Gaza. She unfortunately was killed in her home while she was sleeping. And I just want to make sure that if Habiba's family is watching, you know, she did have a chance to tell her story here to the British public. You know, we hear her. And this is about children. I don't care. This is not about religion. Stop killing children from each side. There has to be a different alternative. There must be.
Lee, I'll let you both answer.
Two extremely powerful stories from different sides of the divide. And we all want peace. We all want this to end. We all didn't want this to happen in the first place. And to your point, sir, about two wrongs not making a right, you're absolutely right. That's not why I have said what I've said tonight. I've said what I've said tonight because Israel, just like the United Kingdom, has a duty to ensure its citizens, just like you, can go about their day, can ensure they get up the next morning, can make sure that the kind of things that you've described don't happen here in the UK, just like they shouldn't have happened in Israel. And when that is not possible, when they can't defend that, when they're unable to do that, it is absolutely legitimate. It is absolutely legitimate for Israel to ensure.
Hang on, don't shout out. I'll put your point. The man is saying, does that justify a war crime?
Well, I disagree with the concept that that's what's happening. But what Israel is doing is it's self-defense. And if somebody
Hang on, I know you disagree, but let him make his point.
If somebody can tell me how Israel, how its citizens can defend themselves tomorrow, next month, next year from Hamas, who will come through that barrier again, who will kill again. And that's why Hamas have to be removed.
OK, let Jonathan come up. I'll let Jonathan ask, because you also made some points about the Labour Party. So the Labour Party is in some difficulty over this. We've got a shadow frontbencher already saying that Labour should be calling for a ceasefire, which it isn't. And you've had a number of resignations, councillors. Dozens of MPs, Labour MPs, have signed an early day motion for a ceasefire. What is the Labour position now?
The Labour position has been the same from the beginning, which is that Israel has that right to defend itself, as I said in my opening answer.
But in terms of a ceasefire or a pause, what's Labour's position on that?
We're not
that
in
seems
favour
to
of
have
a
evolved.
ceasefire. We do believe a humanitarian pause is necessary to get aid in, and the position has always been, sir, Israel has to have that right to defend itself. I said that clearly at the start. That must be done in conjunction with international law. That's not negotiable, but that must be done with aid getting into Gaza, whether that's food, fuel and medicine. And language is important at all times. It's particularly important at a time like this, where there's been a query. We've clarified that. I think that is the right thing to do.
And do you think you're convincing your own party, given you've got a shadow front bencher
Yes,
who's resigned today?
I think the position
that person's clearly not convinced.
I think the position is clear. I think this is incredibly difficult. It's a difficult time for any of us to be representing any community, and I think I wouldn't criticise any person trying to express the views of their constituents in a way which will be challenging, and I think, frankly, it's not really about the internal workings of British political parties. We're trying to get that position. Could I just say one thing, though, because there was a comparison made earlier between the peace process in Northern Ireland and the IRA and Hamas. I think it is very, very important to understand that the IRA were terrorists, but they were nationalists, that there was a process that ultimately we could go under. You cannot think of Hamas in the same way. The difference between... The difference between the Palestinian nationalist movement, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas is very, very different, sir.
Hang on, let him answer.
I just think it's very important to say, you can say, go and talk to them. They would not want to talk to Israel. They would not be interested in a peace process. What they are interested in is the kind of brutal surprise attack that took place on October 7th, and we just have to acknowledge that is the reality.
Gabriel, you want to come back in?
Baroness Warsi had something she wanted to read out, and I've scribbled something in my bio as well. It's as follows. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." Those words are contained in the founding charter of Hamas. Hamas, in instigating this war, would have been alive to the inevitable consequences.
Hamas is not Palestine.
So you're saying Hamas is not Palestine?
I'm glad that you have said Hamas is not Palestine, because before you interrupted me, I was going to say precisely that. The Palestinian people deserve self-determination and dignity, but you cannot negotiate with people who are avowedly annihilationists when it comes to the Jewish state and the Jewish people, of which I am one, and they don't make any distinction about Jews or Israelis.
No, hang on, please don't shout out, otherwise we won't be able to hear what people are saying.
There are two options. If there's any universe in which Hamas, by the way, in previous contexts, Hamas does negotiate with Israel, often in down hotel corridors in Egypt. There are indirect conversations, but this attack has put a bomb under the status quo, and if there is to be any way out of it, number one, they have to, whether it's off their own volition or pressure from their allies, as I mentioned before, Doha currently houses Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas chief, in an air-conditioned suite in their capital. If there's going to be any way out of this, they have to announce that they're avowedly annihilationist, genocidal beliefs, and furthermore, we have to find a way to bring in the rest of the Palestinian leadership, including the Palestinian Authority. And I think, Alyn, you talked about Hamas throwing gay people off buildings. They also threw Fatah activists and politicians off buildings when taking over the Gaza Strip. They're not realistic interlocutors for achieving an end goal that sees Israel and Palestinians seeing peace and security side by side.
Okay. The woman here with her hand up.
Ultimately, there is going to have to be dialogue, because people can't just carry on killing each other until the whole of the Gaza Strip has been flattened and there's no one left alive. People do need to talk to each other, and surely the intelligence services and the allies of Hamas know who the leaders are, they know where they are. Those conversations need to start, and a ceasefire has got to be the starting point.
Okay. Woman there, just on the stage. Woman there in the glasses, yeah.
I think we should remember what Golda Meir said, perhaps change the word from Arabs to Hamas. She said, there will never be peace in Israel until Hamas learn to love their children more than they hate the Jews.
Okay. And let me ask the woman there who just, with the leather jacket on, I think? Yes.
So we're talking about the diplomatic and the military situation happening in the Middle East. And as somebody who has a background in journalism and political science and who has worked at a short period in the White House and has been at the UN, I'm a huge advocate of free speech. But what happens when free speech becomes hate speech? And where are the limits? What can be done because of what's happening? We're talking about, you know, a whole organization who wants to annihilate, and the things that are happening not only here on campuses and on the cities, but across the United States, the protests that are happening in tremendous, outlandish numbers. What can we do now?
Okay. That's a big question. Not quite what Brandon's question was. Half an hour has elapsed, and I'm thinking I'm going to take another question.
Could I have this other question?
You want to wait one more point before I do? All right, go on then.
I think one thing that is being missed altogether in this conversation, and politicians everywhere, is who is behind this. And I saw BBC TV, an Arabic presentation with a respondent who, it was with subtitles, and he said, "Why are you talking like this? This is Iran. Iran came into Syria and destroying Syria. Iran came into the Yemen with the Houthi rebels, they're destroying Yemen. Iran came into Lebanon, Lebanon is mostly destroyed. And now Iran is in Gaza. And Hamas is supplied by Iran, and it's also told what to do. And at the moment, there was about to have Saudi Arabia, in the Abraham Accords, was going to sign some kind of peace arrangement with Israel. It was a momentous act of peace. And this whole area of the Arab world was making peace and prosperity with Israel. And Iran could not accept that. And that's when they said to Hamas, now is the time. And unless we face Iran head on and tell them to stop meddling, stop interfering with the Arab world, you're not Arabs, and you're ruining the Arab world. And they've got to back out, we've got to confront them.
Well, we will revisit this subject, I am absolutely sure of, in the coming weeks. Brandon, thank you for your question. I'm going to take another question. There's a lot of you asked about this. Obviously, most of you want to talk about this, and that's why I've given it half the programme. But in order to do justice to your other questions, I'm going to move on now. Before I do, I'm just going to say, tell you where we are next week, which is Chipping Campden in Gloucestershire. And the week after that, we're in Llandudno on the North Wales coast. If you'd like to come and go to either of those programmes, Chipping Campden or Llandudno, go to our website and you can follow the instructions there. And incidentally, if you want to have a picture of your town here, you may laugh, Sayeeda, but we like having these pictures here. You can go to the website and follow the instructions there, and it gives us some sense of as we're moving around the country, which we like to do. OK, we're going to take another question now from Abby Turton.
Is the scrapping of the cap on bankers' bonuses an insult to working people struggling in a cost of living crisis?
Right, so this has happened on Tuesday, I think. Jonathan.
I mean, I think people seeing this story, you know, there'll be disbelief that this is an announcement during what is a really hard cost of living crisis and still the dominant problem for many people in this country. The truth is this policy never really worked as it was supposed to. The banks essentially just put the money into the basic pay, and there's been better ways to manage the risk in terms of the responsibilities and the capital the banks keep. But what I do think it speaks to, what that insult speaks to, is that we need an economy that is fairer for people, a fairer economy and a fairer society that goes with it. And that's why in the Labour Party we've said, for instance, we'll scrap the non-dom tax regime, the tax regime for the super rich, put that money into the NHS. That's why we said we'll tax private education differently, put the money into state education that most people use, tax private equity more, give people more employment rights in the care sector and the gig economy. I think that's the real substance of this. But I know looking at the headline, people will think, I just can't believe this is the state of the country at this time. But there are better and real meaningful ways, I think, to improve the economy as it works for people. And that's exactly what the Labour Party wants to do.
Lee, was this a good move?
Well, there are certain decisions taken by politicians and there are certain decisions taken by regulators, and this was a decision this week that was taken by a regulator. I'm not sure.
Yes, but this was, hang on. This was promised by a former Conservative Chancellor, although very briefly, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Active on the former.
Yeah, so hang on, so it didn't come out of nowhere. This came from within the government.
You're absolutely right. It didn't come out of nowhere. I'm not sure I would have chosen this week to do it. But
so the timing is bad, but the decision is good. Is that what you're saying?
But what I'm saying is there are independent regulatory processes, and we have to honour those. Where I do agree with Jonathan is that if you stand back and look at this process, it wasn't working very well. But when I'm going home tonight to Derbyshire, I absolutely know that there is a significant challenge with cost of living. There is an absolute challenge of making sure that people can live and can prosper and can get up in the mornings. And we have to try and help there. The government's put an awful lot of help in over the last year where it's able to do so. But the
scrapping the cap a good idea?
The key thing we have to do is get inflation down. The key thing.
Is that going to help with inflation? I don't think so. Hang on. This is something that was suggested by the government. You're here representing the government. Why is this a good idea?
And the decision has been made by the regulator now.
But the government suggested, why do you think it's a good idea?
And what the government is focusing on is trying to get inflation down so everybody...
But hang on.
Everybody's wages...
In fairness, Lee, you're here representing the government. This was something that was introduced by a Conservative Chancellor. Presumably thought it was a good idea. The current Chancellor has not gainsaid it and has let it go ahead. Why do you think it's a good idea?
Well, as Jonathan indicates, there is a challenge with how this was all structured. But ultimately... You can do those kind of policies, and the regulator has made the decision this week it's going to do that policy. But what I'm trying to indicate, trying to dodge the question, what I'm trying to indicate is there's a broader set of things which the government is trying to do, recognising exactly the point that the cost of living crisis and the cost of living challenges have been here over the last year. They're getting somewhat better, but what we have to try and do is ensure that they continue and that we help where we can, and we can get people back to where we want them to be post-COVID.
Alyn.
Look, one of the reasons I want Scotland to be independent, and a substantial amount of people in Scotland want us to be independent as well, is because I think we do this stuff differently. I get emails from pensioners who can see the Brazedoon wind farm just outside Stirling, and they're wondering why on earth, in the name of the wee man, are our energy costs going up as much as they are when Scotland produces as much energy as it does. People are struggling with their mortgages, they're struggling with their rents, they're struggling with precarious employment, they're struggling with all sorts of economic consequences of COVID and Brexit. And the UK government wants to implement not only the current government's policies, but Liz Truss's government's policies in capping bankers' bonuses. It's absurd. So, where the Scottish Government has had power, we've promised a freeze on council tax for the next year. Now, that's going to be tough, but we're going to work with local government to make that happen, because that's going to help keep money in people's pockets at a time that's really tough. The winter is going to be really tough for a lot of people, which is why we need to see renewed action on energy costs, because the UK has delivered a broken energy market to all of us, not least in Scotland. We need to see action in the King's speech that's actually going to help working people through this cost of living crisis. And the idea that bankers need to have more freedom to make bigger bonuses for themselves is entirely wrong with what's wrong with Westminster.
Okay. Man there in the pink tie.
Thank you. The scrapping of the cap on bankers' bonuses was described as one of the freedoms of Brexit that we now have. Am I to believe, as someone who lives in a relatively impoverished part of Britain, am I to believe that these benefits of Brexit involve the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer?
There you go.
Okay. Abby, you asked this question, and you've got your hand up again. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I feel as though all you've really said there, Lee, is, oh yeah, the timing's not great, but it's kind of been done now. And I feel as though, I'm a trainee English teacher, I'm only 22, I literally started it this September, and I'm going into this off the back of all the strikes this year. I mean, call me crazy with the state of it, but I love it, it's a passion of mine. And I just feel as though I am not valued by this government. And seeing this is absolutely enraging. You see all these strikes, and all we're asking for, and all we've fought for tooth and nail, is a pay that's in line with inflation, that's not a real-term core. And yet you see this, and reading headlines like this, it's absolutely infuriating. And I just wondered, do you understand what this does for the optics of the party? And I guess more importantly for you, how people will react to this, because it's not good.
Of course I understand. Of course I understand the challenges, and I see it because in my constituency, where I'm from, where I was born, where I grew up, where I went to state school, I absolutely understand the challenges of how we make society fairer and how we make society work. But in order to do that, the honesty that I need to tell you is that there are trade-offs in politics. Politics is the art of infinite and very, very worthy demands with very, very finite resources, and that's the job of politics. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we can support not just education, but also the huge challenges we've got post-COVID in the NHS and many other areas. And the reality, any politician that tells you that all of this can be done to the place where everybody wants it is a politician that isn't telling you the truth. And what the government is trying to do after an extremely difficult time post-COVID is balance all of these different things in order to get through and bring inflation down so that we can have a brighter tomorrow.
Do you agree with that, Sayeeda?
No, I don't. Because... Sorry. I'll tell you why, because this particular cap was brought in after the 2008 financial crash, when banks were seen to be working in a way which was like casino banking, and bankers were taking huge risks with people's money, which eventually resulted in the financial crash, and countries all across the world had to bail out banks with taxpayers' money. And off the back of that, it was felt appropriate within the European Union to say that these bankers should not be getting these excessive bonuses and therefore we should cap them. And let's not forget what was agreed. These bonuses are capped at 100% of the banker's salary. So if a banker is on 50,000, he can get an extra 50,000 in his pay packet. I think if we said to any worker in this country that your bonus is capped at 800, 2 times if you had shareholders' permission.
Okay.
So there was even a possibility to have it 2 times your salary as long as the shareholders agreed to it. I think if you said to anybody in this country that you can have a bonus which is your salary all over again, they would think they were quids in. And so so we have to therefore say, why did the government do this? And I find it really shocking, Lee, at a time when the Prime Minister is saying to public sector workers, we cannot increase your salaries because we're trying to get our first priority of getting inflation under control, so we can't put more money into nurses' pockets because we think that will have an inflationary pressure, but we can put more money into really rich bankers' pockets because that won't affect inflation. It's a completely...
I think there are 2 questions. I mean, the first is this policy. I think we've used the word optics, how it looks, how it feels, and I don't want to discount how people feel, especially I think in a week when it was 4 million people in the country facing destitution. How people feel is not irrelevant. But actually, if you look at the letter of the policy, as Jonathan alluded to, it just happened not to work. If the effect of it was that banks just hiked up people's pay, then I get the catharsis of, I get the emotional appeal of capping it, but it didn't work. So I think this policy, candidly, is just a recognition of reality. The broader, kind of more interesting political tension is absolutely this, idea that people expected there to be a different kind of economy post-Brexit, and they were promised that. And then there's this kind of divergence between the people who've been in power within the Conservative Party, many of whom favour deregulation, taking the fetters off business, allowing a free market, and on the other hand, what people want, which it seems is a more interventionist state, helping them and in a more proactive way. I think that's a much more complicated, thorny, and actually important question than whether this one policy is right or not. I get why it's so offensive to public sector workers, but it doesn't mean that bringing it back would actually solve the issue at hand.
OK. I'm going to try and get through 2 more questions before we get to the other programme. Might not succeed, but I'm going to give it a go. Charlotte Moore, where are you, Charlotte?
So the Conservatives have now lost 4 by-elections. When will Rishi Sunak give what the population wants, which is a general election?
Well, it's whether it's what the population want, don't know, but it's clear what you want, Charlotte.
Quite a lot, but at the same time, there's also been a petition that's been signed by over 260,000 people asking for a debate on a general election, and they've turned around. They won't even debate it in Parliament. Why not?
Sayeeda.
Well, I don't speak for the government anymore. But there was a poll.
What's your opinion?
My opinion is that Maureen Coleman did a research piece, a polling piece, in which they said that actually 3/4 of the public do want a general election by May of next year. And there's some suggestion, actually, from what the Prime Minister said recently, that we may have a general election in about 12 months' time from now, which would be autumn of next year. My instinct is that he's been in power, the Prime Minister's been in power for a year. He's laid out 5 of his priorities, and it will be those 5 priorities that the public will judge the Conservative Party against. And I therefore I believe that the best time to have a general election would be around autumn of next year.
OK, Gabriel?
Look, I think that there are a lot of people, including the Labour Party, who are whispering that Sunak's going to spring an early election on the public. I get the political imperative for the Labour Party to say that they have to look like they're not being, they have to look like they're preparing for all scenarios. I think it is, a law of political gravity that Prime Ministers like being Prime Minister as long as possible. And the by-election last week confirmed what we've known for a while, which is that people at the ballot box are behaving in line with what they say when asked by pollsters for their opinion. The polls have calcified, but now the polls are leading to actual results and seats changing hands. And I just cannot personally, maybe these words are a hostage to fortune. I can't conceive of a universe in which Rishi Sunak, with the country, continually delivering double-digit poll deficits, is going to go to the country anything earlier than the 11th hour.
Woman there in the glasses.
Somebody, I don't know who, once said it doesn't matter which political party gets into power, the government are always in power, meaning they're all as bad as each other, basically.
So would you or would you not welcome a general election soon?
I wouldn't welcome one because I don't know who to vote for. The Conservatives... The Conservatives are getting more sleazy every day, and Labour haven't got a proper policy, and when they do say something and flip-flop on any decision, it's frightening. If they get in power as well, never mind non-DOMs leaving the country because you're going to tax them to death. I might leave the country. Right.
Well, you've clearly both got your work cut out. Yes, the man here.
Yes, I've voted for the Conservatives since 1978, and if my math is right, as Rushy wants me to do, that's 45 years. Never again. The Conservative Party have treated the country with contempt. They've treated me with contempt, and it's about time the country had a chance to vote to put the Conservatives on the opposition benches for a few years so they can reflect on what they've done, the damage they've done to this country.
All right, well, listen, I'll give you both a chance to answer. Lee, let's kick off with you then. You've got to persuade that woman there, and also you've lost this man here. How do you get him back?
Yeah, so there's absolutely no doubt the Conservative Party has made mistakes last year. Absolutely no doubt.
Which ones would you single out in particular? Lee, which ones would you single out in particular?
And the reality is that there are 2 big challenges which the Rishi's trying to deal with, which the Prime Minister's trying to deal with. One, a whole heap of large-scale challenges, many of which other democracies around the world are going through. Inflation, challenges with regards to foreign policy. I won't go through them all now. All of those things a responsible government is trying to go through, but it's taking time. And some of those are things which we wish wouldn't happen, but they have happened, particularly after COVID. So we're trying to work through those on a stepped basis, and we want to be able to have the opportunity to be able to show you next year that we've been able to make progress. And then secondly, to be frank, as I say, the Conservative Party has made mistakes. And so the second challenge the Prime Minister is trying to do is he's tried to stabilise the situation over the last year. And now over the next year, having done a number of things like Windsor Framework, trade deals, trying to make progress on the 5 priorities, he's going to try and show you about what he wants to do over the next 5 years if you re-elect us. Now, I know a lot of you are cynical. I know many of you feel that the Conservatives have not done well in the last few years. And the job of the Conservative Party now is to try to show you that centre-right policy, sensible centre-right policy. The reason I became a Conservative in the first place, not from a political family, not from a background in politics, are the way in which we make our country better for the long term. And I still believe that we can do that.
Right. Your pitch to... What's your name? Pardon? Diane. Your pitch to Diane.
Well, let me say, first of all, to Charlotte, we do need a general election, but I don't say that because Labour's winning elections. I say it because there are big decisions being taken and there's no mandate for those decisions, and they have huge consequences for people. I think people want to have a say in that. I mean, if you think about the Prime Minister's pitch, which is he's making long-term decisions, I mean, cancelling infrastructure projects, making short-term changes, those aren't big long-term decisions, and he should have a mandate. I mean, I just looked up on the way
Diane
here.
thinks you're a flip.
Well, I'm going to come to that point.
Or at least you're
Let me just say on the long-term decisions, right? Boris Johnson promised this town, this city, sorry, Bradford, a new station. Boris Johnson then cancelled that. Liz Truss then promised a new station for Bradford. Rishi Sunak then cancelled that as Chancellor, only for Rishi Sunak to promise that again as Prime Minister. I mean, you need a say in this, right? And just...
But answer Diane's question about flip-flopping.
You say Labour hasn't got policies. Look, we've got policies to build more homes, to put more money into the NHS, to put more money into the state education system, to have a clean energy system so we're not dependent on these dictators and the oil price flying up and the gas price flying up, so you've got to pay higher energy bills. Plans for more police. And look, you might not be with us yet, Diane, but the fact that we are winning those by-elections from Rutherglen to Mid-Bedfordshire to Tamworth, you know, places we haven't had an easy time in recent years. We've been able to do that because we've changed, because we've listened, and people can look to us as a proper vehicle to get rid of this government and get you one that starts delivering on the things that you really care about.
Alyn, do you want a general election sooner rather than later?
We're ready for it when it happens. We actually literally today just confirmed all of our candidates for the Westminster election. I'll be candidate for Stirling and Strathallan. But I have to say, and I'm conscious I'm speaking to an English audience, that I think the change that the UK needs, and the UK's on the skids, and I think the change that is necessary for the UK goes beyond a change at leadership at number 10. There is big structural changes that need to happen in the UK's electoral system, in the way that the UK manages power, in the way that the UK interacts with the wider world. Now, Lee talks about the Windsor framework and the trade deals that have been done. All of that was trying to fix the mess that Brexit created, which his party did. And the Labour Party was posted missing upon.
Which the British people made a choice on.
Well, the people of Scotland didn't.
Well, the British people did, and until it changes, we are in a union of the United Kingdom, and the Union of the United Kingdom made that decision, and it was absolutely incumbent upon the government of the day to make sure that decision was implemented. Otherwise, we would have a whole heap of additional problems right now, with people being even more cynical.
Well, we've already talked about one of the biggest benefits of Brexit, which is for bankers' bonuses to go through the roof.
Oh, that's not serious.
So I think that the UK needs significant change. We're ready for it from my party's perspective whenever it happens.
Even though you lost the last by-election?
Well, we lost the last by-election, and that was sore, and I wouldn't pretend it wasn't. I spent a lot of time campaigning for a great candidate in Rutherglen, Katie Loudon. But I've met the Labour candidate who won and shaken his hand, and that's democracy. But the lady talks about all politicians are the same. I really think, and I sound a wee bit anarchy when I say this, but structures matter. The Scottish Parliament is elected by a proportional system where there's a greater plurality of voices. We're in a government partnership with the Greens, which means that politicians have to negotiate with each other to get anything done.
Right.
In order to get anything through the Parliament, there needs to be a consensus. We need to get away from the punch and Judy stuff that the UK has been bedevilled by for so long and actually get longer-term consensus amongst our politicians.
Diane, let me come back to you. Has anything you've heard here informed now how you might actually vote at the general election?
No. And luckily, the SNP are not standing here, because if everybody in England's government's the same, SNP is a car crash for Scotland, if you read the news. Wheeling out the chestnut of Brexit, I've just been to Arizona. They've got high inflation. They've got high interest rates, maybe not as high as ours. Talk about inflation. You go into a supermarket in Arizona and you're paying £6 for a dozen eggs. You walk past shops, you walk past bars, everybody's hiring. And I said to my husband, well, Brexit struck in America as well, hasn't it? You know, you can't keep wheeling it out. You need to get on with it.
OK. All right, Diane, you've had your say and we'd be glad to hear it. I'm going to just fit in this last question. You've got about 3 or 4 minutes. Let's change the mood for a moment. Sandy Firth, where are you, Sandy?
I'm here.
Go on, then.
Should employees own up to any sexual, romantic or even platonic relationships with a colleague?
Right. So the reason this has come up is because ITV has set out new rules following the issues with Philip Schofield, obliging its employees to disclose relationships with other members of staff, and not just familial or marital or quasi-marital, but even just friendships, shorter or longer term. Alyn, what do you think about that?
Goodness. Can we not go back to bankers' bonuses? How on earth do you regulate for people's private lives? People are complicated beasts, and we see this at Westminster, where I've seen some really pretty awful behaviours. And what's appropriate in the workplace is different in your family life. And there needs to be a common sense approach to this sort of stuff, that if you're in a certain situation, some things are appropriate. If you're not, you're not. And I think what ITV has tried to do is to create a piece of paper that's going to try and protect them rather than actually do anything that's useful.
Yeah. I mean, the TUC, for example, have done a survey saying 1 in 5 people met their partner in work, 1 in 3 have a relationship with a colleague. I mean, it's tricky, Sayeeda.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. This is a document which will basically protect their back off the back of the scandal that they had.
But do you think they're making a serious point? Or do you think it's just impossible?
If your relationship is above board, then everybody's going to know about it anyway. And if your relationship is illicit, the chances are you're not going to declare it. So I don't understand how this document's going to work.
Did anyone here meet their partners at work?
No. I work with my wife.
Oh, you work with your wife? Oh, there we go then. Yeah, OK. The man there in the check shirt.
No interest really whether the sound man's having a relationship with the cameraman over there. Absolutely no interest.
But anyway, yeah.
The nub of this is power and power imbalance, and that goes into every single question we've talked about tonight. The banker with the bonus has more power than the worker that's on the breadline, and it's inappropriate power. The last question, all about a general election. My personal view is it'll make no difference, because every single answer was about how can we grasp hold of power. And it's not, I didn't hear any answers there about how they were going to change my life.
Okay.
And that's why I'll be spoiling my vote. And
no. OK. Gabriel. You've only got a couple of minutes, you have to be pretty quick. Should employees own up to any sexual, romantic or even platonic relationships with colleagues? Does much of that go on in the old Sunday Times?
Wow. I mean, I know my editor's watching, so I'm going to be very careful with what I say. I'm going to elegantly, foxtrot away from that and, address the question. I think you put it beautifully. This is actually about, what did Philip Schofield tell us? It was essentially that people at the apex of these big organisations have power and play by different rules to everybody else. So really, this deranged idea that, junior producer on Question Time or Cobb reporter on the Sunday Times should be filling out an Excel spreadsheet saying, I chat to somebody in the canteen the other day. What does that mean? I mean, it means nothing. It's an arse-covering exercise. And the real question... I also love that, after all my very sober points on Israel-Palestine, the one thing that gets me applause is this. So,
well done, Gabriel.
I'll take what I can, but I do think the bigger question in politics... you
have to be quick, so I've got to get 2 more people in. Go on.
And indeed in television, it's actually how you manage the people at the very, very top.
Jonathan.
Well, I do work with my wife in this role, which I do declare. Actually, when I was a trainee solicitor, you had to do this. You had to declare any...
But even friendships?
No, that would have been as embarrassing as it sounds. So, as the gentleman there said, look, good workplaces, good workplace culture, it's about a lot more than this. It's about independent representation, true union rights in a workplace, about access to justice, good management, whistleblowing. That's what I would like to see all employees focus on, serious stuff.
Lee.
Well, we've spoken today about politicians, Punch and Judy and things like that, and I think actually Alyn said it very, very well, difficulty regulating private lives, but ultimately there is a balance to be struck, and there are some things where it is obviously clear that disclosure should be necessary, and some things where it seems relatively ludicrous that that's the kind of thing which should... So I think, for once, we'll agree.
There we are. Look, our hour is up, and I think we've done the whole gamut of human emotion from the start to the end of this programme. That's it for us. Thank you very much to our panel. Thank you very much to all of you here for coming along here tonight in Bradford. And thank you, of course, to you at home for watching. And remember, if you can't stay up late, you don't want to watch us after 10 o'clock news, we are live on iPlayer at 8 o'clock every week. And I just want to say thank you to Darren Speck, who's here in the audience somewhere. Darren, there you are, for these photographs here. Thank you very much indeed. From Question Time, until next week.